book and a pen. There's not going to be a whole lot of writing involved, but there's some, because this is more of an applied thing in terms of, the curriculum that I'm trying to get across here. And we arrived at this, Jeff Jackson and myself. Jeff used to be editor-in-chief of Rock and Ice Ascent and all that stuff, and now he's a professor of lit over in University of Hawaii. But we've been teaching this for quite a while here and there. And one of the things we found is that, we both went through grad school writing programs and what have you. And teaching theory is if you have a little class like one that we have here, and you're in constant contact with students, you can actually teach theory because you're driving the fine points of it home a lot. So it becomes clear what you're talking about. But if you're doing hit and miss stuff like 90-minute little Zoom meetings like this, theory is a very slippery thing to try to teach. And we found that it's much more beneficial. People have a lot more they can take away from it and tangibly use in their writing if we make it much more practical. So that's how we ended up with this thing. In a general way, what we're doing is you can look, there's 4 stages that we're going to cover, and you could break that down to 8 stages to 20 stages. It's somewhat arbitrary, but we found that the 4 stages are the easiest way to organize the material that we're talking about. And you can think of the first 3 stages as input. Thanks to Mike, he's the one that came up to that. Mike's here today with us. Think of those as input, and then the 4th stage, which is the final editing, like working up your final draft. You can look at that in terms of output. And one of the things we found, like over years of doing editing and with our own stuff and what have you, is that an enormous amount of time is wasted in the input stage because we didn't organize ourselves correctly. We didn't orient ourselves going into a particular writing project. And we learned that if you can get a handle on the input, the 3 main things that go into to put yourself in a position to start a final draft, if you really make all of those decisions as conscious as you can, and you know exactly what's involved so far as you can, you never know totally what we're doing writing. You don't want to know really, because it's not math. But if the more you wherewithal you can bring to the input stage, those first 3, the much more efficient you are, the less you get burned out, the less just sort of cocking around on dead ends and what have you. It just makes you more efficient. And that's a really important thing if you're a professional writer. And we usually only teach this to professionals. Not that anybody can't get something out of it, but for a professional, time management is a really important part of what you're doing. So it behooves everybody that's a professional writer to be as efficient as they can. And that's really what the first 3 stages of this thing are. So let's just get involved. Let's just jump into it. Anybody writing the 4 stages, like it's a 4-step process for narrative writing, but anybody that writes any story, it doesn't matter what kind, actually any kind of writing, you're always going to be faced with 4 basic stages or steps. Number 1 is you have to pick a tale to tell. You have to decide, okay, this is the story I'm going to try to write. Now, there is such a thing as you can sit down and try to go into, like an exploratory thing. I'm just going to free associate and just see what happens, come what may, and maybe I'll be able to pick something interesting out of there, and it'll give me some ideas, and I can go from there. More power to you if you want to try that, but that's not something that a professional is going to build a career on doing. A professional is generally going to be working either on an assignment or on a contracted piece of work, and you have to work efficiently on that. And that's going to involve deciding okay, I'm going to do this book or I'm going to do this story. So there's no way around sort of making that decision. Second one is you're going to have to answer the question, however vaguely, what is this story about? Then decide what terrain in terms of scenes, characters, and what have you, you're going to cover in the story. An outline, the progression of events starts to take shape, even if it's just in your head, right? And then the third, you're going to either recall if it's nonfiction, or you're going to imagine if it's fiction, the basic figures, or in other words, the scenes where of what happened in the story. There's going to be a natural progression of that. Even if the story is nonlinear, you still have a natural progression of things, and you're going to have to dictate those impressions of those figures onto the page to create a first draft, right? And if it sounds theoretical, don't worry, we're going to get right down to it in a second. And then the fourth stage is you're going to have to craft all of that into a finished narrative, which is the revision editing step. Now, most of the writing tutorials that you're going to find online, a lot of the basic composition stuff or the stuff you find in undergraduate or even graduate school, the bulk of all of that is going to be about step 4, which is, thematic stuff, characterization, voicing, all of the basic compositional stuff. And then, the higher register things of, theme and all of that stuff that affects the tone of whatever you're going to do. We found, as I said, that an amazing amount of stories fail because the input, the first 3 stages, were not understood and were not executed very well, right? And that's what this does. Even though the input stage probably only constitutes about 5, at the most 10% of the time you're going to spend it on a story, oftentimes much less than that, it is totally crucial to be able to get those pieces together as cogently as you can, because it sets you up for success. And trust me on this, we learned that the hard way. So let's look at step 1, which is can you actually read that, or does it look backwards? Is it backwards? Or can you read it? Okay. Choosing the right story. So what you go into a writing class, and what you're going to hear it from the time you begin till the last class you take, which is write what you know. That's correct. However, it's equally crucial to write what we are good at. Okay. And so once again, you write what you know. That's the general advice, but it's equally crucial, if not more crucial, to write what you're good at. For instance, I love poetry. All right. And let me go back a step. What I love and what I'm good at are not necessarily the same thing. And that's where a lot of people get turned around, like a whole lot of people. For instance, I love poetry. I love, I'm always bugging Leah to send me new stuff. I go on poetry, blogs, online stuff. I love, for whatever reason, I love it, probably because I'm not particularly good or any good at doing it. Right now, that dynamic can throw people off like crazy, and we've seen that happen repeatedly, because somebody that, for instance, that loves crime fiction but is actually really good at doing journalistic pieces on the news or whatever, they're going to spend a lot of their time trying to do the stuff that they're not good at. And that's the best way to fail. You're setting yourself up to fail like that. So what's important to do, and you only have to really do this one time in your career and then remind yourself over and over, but as a general orientation, you need to be able to wrangle this problem down before, going. If you want to go forward as a writer, it's crucial to understand that. That's not to say that you shouldn't experiment with things that fascinate you, but a professional works at what they're good at and they experiment with what fascinates them. So what I want to do right now is you got a notebook. We're going to take 1 minute and everybody write down the stuff, the kind of writing that you most enjoy reading or that resonates with you the most, or the stuff you gravitate towards, or what you end up reading and liking and loving, and the artists that are involved in it. Just write that out a little bit. And then under that, write what you perceive to be the particular style or genre or whatever, which you are best at doing. Like if you were to write in directly into your strengths, what kind of writing would that be? Is it nonfiction? Is it fiction stuff? Is it young adult stuff? Is it narrative? Is it literary nonfiction? Everybody here knows all those genres. So once again, take 1 minute, write out, just go into your head. Everybody knows the kind of stuff they love. Write out the stuff you love. Underneath it, write out what you perceive to be the style of writing which you're best at. Okay, ready, go. 1 minute.
And I dropped in the chat John's worksheets that he had. He has like a whole outline of today's talk and like some exercises. So look in the chat for those. And otherwise, we'll try to put them on the website as well later, or you can email me.
Okay, minute's up. Okay, let's start with Gabriel. What do you got? What do you got for us, Gabe? You can unmute yourself and just let it rip.
Hey there.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for showing up.
I didn't expect to share here, but I can do it. Let's see. I think the things that I love to read the most are long form environmental journalism and literary sci-fi, which I know are on sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. Yeah. And I think what's most in my wheelhouse, just because I've done it the most, is arts journalism. So yeah, that's probably what I'm best at.
Do you ever find yourself wanting or being drawn to try to write the stuff that you really like?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just want to point out the fact that that's the most human thing in the world. Is you have your heart's in one place, but your talent might be in another. And how many times have people tried to do stuff where their heart's at and they're just not any good at it? Case in point, me with poetry. Okay. How about you, Stephanie? I'll call the people I know.
Oh, I hate sharing.
Okay, yeah, you got to get over yourself here. This is a little group. We're all writers.
So I really enjoy reading memoir, and I definitely enjoy reading fiction. I've tried writing fiction, and that is not my strength. After much struggle, so wish I had that pointed out to me before. But I guess you don't know until you try. And I do a lot of news writing in my job, so I suppose that's what I'm best at. And I do a lot of business-oriented case studies. So I think it's not something I love to do, but I've been doing it for a long time, so that's what I'm good at.
Yeah. All right, Mike, I was going to call on you, so let it rip.
Which Mike? This one?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Okay. Yeah, so it's a really good question, John, and I came to the same. Actually, it's easy for me. I love action thrillers, novels actually that have a series. In other words, I like to really dig into a great author and read all of their work over time. And then in terms of what I probably can do, because as your friends mentioned, this disparity between what you like and what you can do. Possibly what I can do would be action thriller short stories. So
Yeah. Now Mike is pretty fortunate insofar that what he loves, he's also developing a real knack for doing it. So that is not always the case. And the purpose of this, I don't want to spend too much time on this. What you want to be able to get out of this is what we love might not be what we're good at. If you're going to be a professional, what's sustainable is playing into your strengths. So go with what you're good at, because you're going to increase your chances of success.
mm-hmm.
And work in your free time on the stuff you love to do. But for the most part, if you want to be a professional, you want to be successful, it's just like anything else. Go with what you're good at, right?
Got it.
And develop as a secondary thing the stuff that might interest you more than you're good at. Now here's an interesting thing. I sent some links, or I provided some links, and one of the I love looking at different art things, because the creative process is basically the same across the board. The case in point here, which really drives this thing home, is Aretha Franklin. Everybody knows who Aretha Franklin is, one of the great R&B singers of all time. She signed with the RCA Records when she was 20 years old. She stayed with RCA Records for 5 years, right? They did 5 albums. None of them did any business. And that's not to say that commercial success is the end all of artistic, achievement. But she came right out and say, "Hey, I'm looking for myself as an artist. I still haven't found it." RCA let her go. She signed on with somebody else. They took her down to that famous place called Muscle Shoals in Alabama, which did everybody from the Rolling Stones to Paul Simon to Jimmy Cliff. They figured out material that fit her talent, and the first record that they did with her was a platinum. It sold like 20 million copies. So the point is, if you find the material that fits your talent, you are way ahead of the game, because it's so easy not to ever get there, right? So that's all we need to really sort of know at this point. Now,
how do you know what you're talented at?
Feedback, success. How did things, how was, if you tried a bunch of stuff, what actually worked in terms of, if you got it published, did people come back to you and want you to do more of this? Did you get positive feedback from it? There's different ways you can figure it out, right? There's no way to figure it out if you don't have anything out there, at least on the internet, for people to reply to, right? So you're really basically going off of whatever the public opinion is. You can always winnow that down to people that you respect and feel solid about in terms of being viable judges of your material, right? It was always easy for me, because I never had another job, and I was always doing stuff, so I was hearing back all the time, and I got put in a certain place and in a certain direction early on, right? It's a good question. Maybe there's no perfect answer to that, but you can generally figure out what you're good at in terms of the reaction and response you're getting from readers. Does that make sense?
Hey, John, could I ask a quick question along
Yeah.
the lines of Leah's question, or Leia's question? The question is, well, how do you know what you're good at? And I'd sort of like take that a little bit further and be a little bit of a devil's advocate. It's like, maybe you really could be good at something if you really drilled down on it and tried to work on it. So it's kind of like the analogy that we were talking about the other day, where a guy who's got a big upper body, he goes to Gold's Gym and he pumps iron all day, but everything's upper body, right? And he just lets his legs go. There's nothing. He wears pants so nobody will see his skinny legs. But maybe he's got the potential to have Arnold Schwarzenegger, quads or something. So maybe could you speak to that? Like, is it worthwhile to explore what's difficult?
Yeah, what I said at the beginning was an attempt to do that, which is if you're having success doing something and you want to be a professional, keep pushing that, right? So you can have a steady, so because it's sustainable.
Yeah.
And if you have a interest, like Stephanie said, she likes to do like fiction and a whole bunch of other stuff. If you really have a burning desire to do that, then on the side, pursue that, right?
Got it.
But if you find success in something, you owe yourself the opportunity to exploit that and see where that can take you. I'm not saying don't try other things. I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
But success is an important part. If you want to be, just like any other business, if you want to sustain things, you need to have something that works.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? There's no perfect answer to this, and everybody's going to have to answer it in their own way. But that's at least you know what the struggle is now, and it's something you probably will continually have to ask and answer as you go, right? Now, the second part of this equation is not nearly as difficult to try to answer, and that is in deciding what story you're going to tell. First off is what we just covered, and there's no perfect answer to it, but your chances of success are better if you've chosen a story that plays into your strengths, either perceived or proven by the reception you've gotten. Is this making sense to everybody, right? Or not? Because I need for that to make sense before I can that making sense? Are you getting that, Leah? Okay. Now the second thing is, okay, granted, say I love action adventure stuff, so I'm going to do an action adventure thing. Now, if it's a nonfiction thing, and you like action adventure, chances are you're going to have an action adventure background. So, how many experiences do you have? In other words, how many potential stories do all of us have in that particular genre? Probably hundreds of things we've done that would fall under that. It's like, how do you choose of all of those many things? How do you choose? And this one makes it really easy, and that is the story must stimulate. And what that means is there's a lot of different things, like I was nobody could ever accuse me of being smart or prudent in my adventure days. So I have a bunch of stuff that I did that was sort of jackass and dangerous and what have you. But 80% of it I can think about, and I'm like, yeah, whatever, this or that. However, there might be 10 or maybe 5% of that stuff. The moment I think about that, I snap up in my chair. I'm like, oh, Jesus, right? That's what you want. If you're going to write a story, you want it to snap you up in your chair just at the thought of it. And it can happen in three basic ways. Either it has a big emotional charge, it has an intellectual charge, meaning my mind just keeps going back to it, and I'm super fascinated by this whole thing. It has a visceral charge, meaning I had some skin in the game or whatever, and I stood to lose a lot, and it just makes me sort of tweaky. Like for instance, Stephanie did a great piece on a botched surgery, and I guarantee you that when she thought about writing that story, a million volts were going through her system. Another case, we had a woman in a writer symposium last year that had never really done much writing. However, she electrocuted herself in a restaurant that she owned, and she went, the first story she ever did, a real one, got nominated for amongst the best sports stories in the United States for the year. That's a pretty good honor. She won against Sports Illustrated, everything. And the reason why these stories work is because they stimulate the hell out of whoever's writing them, right? Like, you think about all the stuff that happened. You want to write. You want to focus on the stuff that, as I said, snaps you up in your chair, gets your mind going, or whatever. It's stimulating. it does something to you internally when you think about it. And that's going to be very important when we get to the third step, because if you're flatline thinking about something, it's going to be very difficult to evoke good material out of it. Okay, is this making sense to everybody? Okay. Like if you're a poet, right? Like I remember Leia wrote something about a chef. Remember that? It was a terrific thing, and it was soulful and what have you. And I know perfectly well when she was thinking about that person, she had deep sentiments and deep feelings about this whole guy's life before he had a stroke. Or I can't remember exactly how it went. That's what you want. You want something when you're okay. I'm good at doing these kind of stories. I have all of these that I can choose from. But how do I know which one to go towards? You go towards the one that has the charge, right? So if you're working towards your strengths and you have a particular story that really has some internal dynamite attached to it, it doesn't mean that you have to feel crazy about it, but at least it moves you in some way. Those are the stories that are the easiest to tell, right? Because they're the closest to us. So let me the last thing is some stories have a transcendental charge. That means they transcend gender, race, creed, beliefs, philosophies, all measurements. These kind of stories are universal stories that talk to everyone, all humanity, right? Those are the best stories. Those are my favorite kind of stories. You might only find 5 or 6 of those in your entire life to tell, but those are also really good ones. It might not be just emotional, intellectual, or visceral charge. It can be a transcendental kind of thing. But if something stirs you, you're on to something there. Those are the stories that most easily tell themselves. And going in, this is all stuff we're talking about before we go into the storytelling. These are decisions you make in the input phase that set us up for success. Okay, that's all we're doing here. So right now, I want you to take 1 minute and jot out 3 possible stories that fit the criteria that we've just discussed, which is these are stories that most likely play into something that I know that I can do and that I feel confident doing. And 2, these are stories that when I think about them, my stuff flutters inside of me. So just you don't have to overthink this. Just take a shot at it. 1 minute, we'll pick it back up. Okay, 1 minute. Okay, take a little bit longer and we'll wrap it up. Okay, give everybody enough time, or do we still need a little bit more? Are we good? Okay, Caroline Rhodes, why don't we start with you? If you can unmute yourself and just looking for feedback. So we found that if students hear each other, it makes more sense. So go ahead.
It's difficult. I'm not sure what makes me flutter inside. I'm writing fiction, so I have a lot of leeway. But I'm not sure how to answer that.
Okay. Let me try. What if you were to go back to certain life events? Can you think of anything that's ever happened in your life that makes you flutter?
That's a good question. Probably a lot of outdoor adventure stuff.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Right.
Yeah.
Now, turning that stuff into fiction is just a matter of changing the details around. You know that,
Yeah.
right?
And I am including that in what I'm working on. So.
Okay. How about Frederick? You're going to have to unmute yourself, Frederick. It's a little icon down.
Yeah.
There you go.
Got it. I have pretty bad ADHD, and I've always been interested in the link between ADHD and adventure sports. And it's just been on my list to write for a long time, and I haven't yet. Like kind of the psychological, I'm a journalist. I make a living as a journalist. So yeah. So that it's an obvious link, and I just sort of haven't got around to it, but it's definitely the most personal sort of journalistic story I could write, I think.
Right, and it's something dear, and it's something close to you too, right?
Exactly.
It's close to me because just last night, Leanne and I were having a conversation about the fact that both of us were ADD.
Yeah.
Most writers and climbers are.
Yeah, I think that's right.
How about Myra?
I've been working on a novel for way too many years, but the novel is about a time that I was a foreman at a coal mine. And I haven't lost my passion for it. I still want to write about it. And I've joined a writer's group, and I'm trying to write more about it.
Okay. Myra, does it make sense to you what we're talking about in terms of working for your strengths and sticking to material that has some kind of charge to it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about Deborah? Yeah.
I was thinking about writing about the time I cleaned out my grandmother's home so she could go to a nursing home, and how I felt about it. And I wasn't close to my mother, but then as we were cleaning out her apartment, I learned about her and about my mom. I got closer to my mom. Then I had to clean out my mom's house, and then we were close, and then I was there when she died. And I thought many people can relate to that, and maybe
well, I mean,
somebody can learn something from it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a story I'd read in a second, right? I mean, it just immediately you're like, wow, because that's one of those great things where the narrator of the story is in a continual discovery mode, right? And the reader gets to discover stuff as you go, as you find out about your own personal history. I mean, look, that's great. You'd almost have to. Those are hard to bungle. They're so good, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you move that story into a style that you feel comfortable doing, maybe it's fiction, maybe it's nonfiction. You could do that as a prose poem. There's a whole bunch of different ways you could relate that, whatever narrative language you chose to do. But you start with something like that, which you know is close to you and close to your heart, and it has a lot of personal history involvement in it. If you stay with that, then you can just choose whatever particular narrative mode you feel most comfortable doing, and that story will come alive. I guarantee it.
Okay, thanks for the encouragement.
Yeah. Okay. Who else wants? How about Max? One more. Max is on his iPhone.
Yeah. Hey, how's it going?
Good, man.
Yeah, I think the one I was thinking about when you said that, I'm a filmmaker, and I'm mostly a filmmaker more than a writer.
You still got
once you said that, I thought, right, exactly. I immediately thought of the first time I ever saw a movie in the movie theater when I was like 4 years old.
Yeah.
And I remember the feeling when I had that. I felt it. I was like, oh, I want to keep following this feeling. And so like I've had that feeling my whole life, and now I'm actually like pursuing it and I've had like these dreams and like kind of like going along and like I've had just so much stuff happen and it'd be like cool to just kind of talk maybe more like I kind of say my progression and what I've gone through. And I'm not really usually good at writing memoirs though.
Memoirs are tricky.
Or just like about myself in general. Yeah. But I guess that feeling when you say something that really stimulates you like that is the strongest feeling I thought of. One of them.
Yeah. And to Max's point, what he said is, something that's immediately you think about it and you realize it's always sort of with you, right? And if you can tap into that stuff, like Caroline Treadway just did a great documentary on eating disorders, right? And that's something that's close to her. And she could have done something on kangaroos. She could have done something on semi-precious stones. She could have done something on Japanese flute music, but it's not going to be as personal, and it's not going to have the same charge, and it's not going to be as easy to tell, right? As something that has what Max just described, which is, I saw it when I was 4 years old, and it's always been with me. That's the stuff you want to go with, right? Because it's the easiest to tell, right? Okay, one last. Angus, you want to take a shot of this? You have to unmute yourself, Angus.
Sorry, I just joined, but I think writing from what's close to you, and I'm just a news reporter, but writing what's close to you, I think that's if you look at Krakauer, he started out with Eiger dreams, and he just took a little piece at a time. And I'm sorry, I'm late to this.
No worries.
But that would be, I think, a good example of someone who recognizes something in her or his close environment and emotional environment that sort of unlocks a key and allows that person to pursue a subject with enthusiasm also.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let me ask you this, Angus, as a working journalist, do you not find it easier and more stimulating to write about stuff that you have a very keen interest in, as opposed to stuff that you feel mediocre about?
Oh, absolutely. And it also was a key to part of my career, in as much as I could explain what a running belay was or a piece of protection, and I could read an accident report and sort of translate it out of the jargon.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. So we're getting somewhere on this thing. Are we getting clear on this? Like, it really is important. The reason why we bring these things up is because if you consciously answer these questions before you start a project, your chances of success on it are exponentially higher, right? Like, look at poor Aretha Franklin, one of the most gifted vocal artists ever. But how far did she get when she's singing the wrong songs, right? Couldn't sell an album. How could somebody that good not sell any albums? It's because you're singing the wrong songs. The same thing can happen to us if we're writing the wrong stories. In other words, you have to be able to match the next motto. And for success, you want to try to match the story to your strengths. It's not a hard and fast rule by any means, but the chances of success in doing so are greatly amplified whenever you do that. And that's not a matter of opinion. That's something we learned, time and time and time again. And how many times have I wasted weeks because I had, a hair up my ass about wanting to write about something that really wasn't that interesting to me. For whatever reason, I had a resentment about it or whatever. It's not something I ever should have taken up. as a writing project. And again, time is something that a professional needs to manage, because realistically speaking, if you're doing a feature article that ranges from 3,500 to 5,000 words, you're going to be looking at anywhere between 80 and 100 hours to get a first draft done. I'm not talking about a blog post. I'm talking about something that's going to go into print, right? Something that somebody's going to want to put in a book or a journal or a magazine or whatever. But it can't be disposable internet writing. That's something you really need to bear down on, right? And it's a dance partner you're going to have for 80 to 100 hours. You really want to dance with somebody that you're really not in love with? You better go with what we've been hearing people, what Max and Angus and et cetera have talked about, which is go where your passion is, because it's going to make that time spent with it, a lot easier, and it's going to greatly amplify your chances of success. So, okay, that's number one. All right, now I'm going to go to number two, and that step number two. We're doing pretty well on time, but what questions if there's any other questions, this is 90 minutes, there's a lot of material. You do have a handout that you can go back to, but this is take a minute, and if anybody has any questions about this, I'll try to answer them as succinctly as I can. Anybody? Or have we made it sort of clear? We're good? Okay.
This is
Go
Bruce. I answer a question, and I'm sorry I got a little late, but can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've just taken up a little bit of interest in writing, and I'm finding that in order for me to write something, a story, I have to write it, edit it, look at it, read it, print it out, write it, edit it, read it, print it out, have others look at it, maybe 5 or 6 times before I get something I'm comfortable with. Is that typical?
Yeah. What we're trying to do here is, before you get to where you're handing the thing out, there's a forensic process which you can go through in short order if you understand how to do it, which greatly increases your chances of the thing coming back with positive results. That's what we're doing here, basically, in these initial steps, right? You're talking about the whole cycle from onset to finished draft to coming back and editing and what have you. I'm only talking about just a few little teeny pieces at the beginning. All right?
Okay.
Are we clear on that, Bruce?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I got online a little late, but I'm trying to catch up.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the whole process is important. But if we make the initial stuff conscious, and we have some rough idea about the things that are important, if we stick to that, we put ourselves up. It's basically, what I'm talking about here? It's just this. If you look at anybody else in any walk of creative, in the creation of anything, no builder is going to go, I'm going to build a house. Call a lumberyard and just say, hey, just come over and just dump a shitload of lumber on this over here. And, I'm not really feeling exactly what I want to do, but I'm just going to start nailing up a bunch of boards, right? And, after a while, I'll sort of get into it, and I'll saw some stuff and throw some beams up. And I'm not real sure whether I want to do a Hawaiian, village kind of place, or a Mexican hacienda, or maybe I want to go Baroque, or is it a bar house place, or I don't know, but I'll figure it out as I go. Dude, you're gonna go through all your lumber. You're gonna spend a whole bunch of time. In other words, the way to do it is to sit down, an architect, drop some plans, figure out what you want to do, right? Consciously decide what you want to do. What kind of houses are you used to building, right? Play into that. Go with a dream house that you really want to do, and then step by step move in that direction, right? So we're just making things conscious as opposed to just winging it and trying to do this all on instinct, because believe me, I did that for years. And this is where I ended up, which is how do I avoid doing that? It's not that that didn't work. It's just really inefficient. And I spent a whole bunch of time writing the wrong stuff, just like Aretha Franklin was singing the wrong songs, right? So that's all we're really doing here, is trying to make this thing conscious, playing it into our strengths so we can amplify the chance of, one, efficiently writing, and two, taking a good crack at stuff that we're stacking the odds in our favor that we're going to be able to succeed. So the step two that we need to get to is skeletal outline, Michener model. Okay, this came from a guy that Jeff Jackson, who I worked with for years, Rock and Ice and Ascent, and all kinds of different writing projects. His brothers are editor at Paris Review, so he's been in the literary world for a long time, and now he's a professor of lit over at University of Hawaii. Jeff won the Michener Award when he was an undergraduate writer at Dartmouth, which supposedly indicates the best undergraduate writer in the United States. Who knows how that's quantified? But anyway, it is an indication that he had talent. So he won a full ride scholarship to do his MFA in writing at the University of Texas at Austin, and hit in the early 90s. And his advisor was James Michener. And what Michener would do, if you know about Michener, I mean, I got jiggy with Michener early on when with the book he won the Pulitzer Prize for, which is Tales from the South Pacific, which is short stories from World War II. And man, that is a fantastic book. And it was later used as the basic for the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical South Pacific. He went on to write these giant tomes. I don't know if it was like Hawaii and what have you. I could never get through any. It's like James Fenimore Cooper books or bad Russian novels. They're like that thick, right? Before he would write any of those, he would spend days, weeks, sometimes months discussing and then eventually writing 3 sentences on a 3x5 file card, which said, this is what this story is about. This is a 900 or 1,200 page book. But beforehand, he would write the thing out in 2, 3, 4 sentences where he knew exactly what book he was writing. It didn't have any of the details. It's a thematic overview. But he felt like unless he did that exercise, he never really knew what he was doing. Didn't mean he didn't know how to write, but in the most specific way. Well, but what are you writing right now? What is that? Like, what's the main thrust of what you're doing? And Michener found, and then later Jeff and I both found out the hard way, that when you clarify at the beginning, like Michener did there, it makes a huge difference in where your story goes. Let me give you an example of like if Michener had written Moby Dick, his outline might have been the epic voyage of the whaling ship Pequod and its captain Ahab, who relentlessly pursues the great whale Moby Dick during a journey around the world. The narrator is Ishmael, a sailor on the Pequod who needed a job and loves the sea. That's it, right? In a nutshell, no details. That's the story of Moby Dick, right? And when you can do that, with a story that you're going to tell, it sets you up in ways that you will later discover that gives you a huge advantage. Just like, for instance, if you go back in the visual arts, especially like expressionist paintings, what have you, some of them, does everybody know what a vanishing point is? It's where all the direct lines converge at a place. Well, especially the expressionists always wrote around, or most of them would paint around a vanishing point. Some of them would even punch a hole in the canvas so a light would shine through, and so everything would sort of funnel in that direction. And that's not to say that every line in a book is going to go towards a vanishing point, but the Michener outline serves as a kind of vanishing point because you always know where north is. That's where we're heading. Or to use O. Henry's language, you know, if a gun shows up at the beginning of a story, you know that damn gun's going to go off before the end of the story. Otherwise, you don't bring it in, right? And so the mystery thing is really sort of like a vanishing point in that respect, and it gives you a pole star, so to speak. So the next exercise is we've discussed what we like. We've discussed what we think we're good at. We came up with some stories that we'd like to tell, right? So the stories that you like to tell that work into, or that are dear to you, that are loaded, that work into things or a style that you feel most comfortable doing, pick one of those and try to do the Michener exercise on one. Okay, are we clear about that? I like this, but I'm good at this. Given that I'm good at this, I can think to myself, okay, in this particular genre of stuff that I'm good at, what are 3 stories I might be able to tell that have a certain charge to them? Of those 3, pick one, and for that one, try to write 3 sentences about it, which in effect do what I did with this mock thing of Moby Dick. Just take a crack at it, right? Take a minute and take a shot at it. How are we doing now? Everybody got something? Give me another 30 seconds. Okay, let's take a crack. All right, Eileen. Unmute yourself and tell us what you have.
Okay.
Thank you.
So,
Eileen's my girlfriend, incidentally. So
I didn't think I'd be called on, but here we go. A girl perceived as timid, shy, and unathletic does a daring dive in Hawaii and finds herself in deeper water than she thought. She manages to overcome the obstacle and realizes she is braver and more resilient than she previously thought. Her love of outdoor adventure is solidified.
terrific. Okay, how about Karen Tara? We don't need to see it, Karen. Just unmute yourself and talk.
Okay, I'll put my face on.
Okay. I can't remember who I've talked to. I can't remember who I've called so far. So if I skip you, it's purely my fault.
Well, Christmas Eve in Rome traditionally serve river eel. Picked live eel at fishmonger, butcher chopped up but left skin attachment. Brought it home, put it on a table in front of a big window, the eel, still alive, jumped out, landed at the porter's feet, a floor below, and the porter, terrified of snakes, watched it slither away in the grass. True story. True story.
This sounds like a great thing to do what's called instant fiction or short fiction, like an anecdotal thing. Yeah, that's a fun one. Okay, Mike, let it rip. Moretti. You're my go-to guy, Mike, so come on.
Yeah. Okay. I've got an aging climber and a young climber in the Italian Alps. The young stud's going to show the old guy how the new generation does it. Young guy falls and breaks his bones. Old guy saves his ass. They become great friends. End of story.
Pretty classic one right there. Okay, Sue Muncaster. Hi, Sue. You're going to have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Okay, got it. I was nervous about this. I had an abortion when I was 19. I didn't have a child until I was 36, and now I have an 18-year-old daughter who is the love of my life. Hello. Today I learned that a clinic in Montana, or that the Montana legislature, it was in Montana, that the Montana legislature is working toward banning all abortions in the state. And that's my story.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you sort of described the story you want to tell. And so the next step would be to work in finer grain and try to come up with beats of the actual beats of the story you're going to specifically tell, as opposed to just the themes. But that's a good one right there. You can't, like I got a feeling that's got some charge to it. You figure out whatever narrative mode that you feel you're strongest at, tell it in that voice. I think you'd have a great shot at the story right there. But do you understand what I'm saying? You basically done step one, which is what story you want to tell. You need to be able to transmute that into actual, like the essence of what that particular story is going to be. That's what the missionary exercise is. Is this making sense to everybody? Okay. Now, iPad 29, you don't have your name there, so I don't know what you're.
Sorry.
No worries.
Leah kind of told me how to change my name, and I tried. I was pointing at the screen. I'm sorry, but I couldn't. My name is Kali. I'll figure it out. Maybe afterwards I can get another tutorial, Leah. But my story is an airport story, an airport scene of leaving Cuba, and the mishap, the mistake in boarding, and how my sister saved the day.
Okay, now what you've done there is more of a step one thing, which is you're discussing what a story is without telling us, or you're discussing a story to tell, a mishap with your sister on a plane in Cuba, but you haven't told us the essence of what the story is driving after, right?
Oh, I see.
You see what I'm saying? The missionary exercise, he was taking a 1,200 page book and saying specifically what thematically he was going to try to do in that book, right? So there's a million different ways you could tell the story you just described.
Yeah.
You need to come up with 3 lines that tell us what that is. And it's not easy to do. That's what this exercise is meant to show us. Right?
I see.
But the point of the thing is, the reason why it's not easy to do is because it's very difficult to ever know what the hell we're doing.
Yeah.
In storytelling. right? And the more we have some idea, at least in theory, about this is what I'm trying to do, the more we know what we're trying to go after. And that is like the vanishing point, right? It doesn't mean it's fixed in stone. I'm going to get to that because you're continually going backwards and forwards on these steps. As you get into the writing process, you will discover stuff you never imagined until you got into it. And so you're going to have to backtrack and go, I got to change that. I got to change my thesis statement a little bit because it's changed on me, right? But as long as you keep doing that and you remain conscious of it, then you have some idea where you are as you're writing. Otherwise, it's all instinct, which is great, but it's not efficient.
Right.
Right. And we're not talking about outlines that are going to you're never going to be a slave to any of this outline stuff because none of the outlines are specific enough to enslave you. All they are is just general markers so you can have some sense of what I'm doing, what I'm going for, and where I am. Right. And having that makes a huge difference. It really does. Okay. So are there any questions about this so far? Like this particular step? Anybody have any questions about it? Because I'm going to make sure we get through all of these steps before we run out of time here. Any questions? Anybody? Speak up if there's even the slightest question here. Okay. All right, we'll move on to the next thing, and that is also part of the second part of step 2 is one, you make the mission statement, you write it out, 3 lines, 2 lines, 4 lines, whatever works for you until you go, okay, this is the story I'm going to, going in, this is my idea of the story I'm going to tell. I have an orientation, I have a North Star, a pole star, whatever you want to call it, right? Then you write what's called, well, we're going to bring in what's called figures, right? And this is the figures are going, this is a slippery one, right? And what this comes from, we're looking to be able to write a skeletal outline of the progression of where this story is going to go. Skeletal. It might only have 4 beats, it might have 6 beats. I went to Yosemite. I met this person. We went up on a cap. He fell and died. I had to get off somehow, and I did. Okay, it might be just that, right? Or some version of that. However, the importance of being able to have that charted out in advance was brought home to me when I studied oil and watercolor videos by the world famous people, the people that were the best at doing it. Everybody that was a master that I saw, and I looked at, I would venture to say thousands of these over the years. Everybody that was a master at either watercolor or oil painting always started by scribbling some stick figures on the canvas. There's a person here, there's a river here, there's a mountain here, there's a building here, there's a tree here, right? It really never got much more specific than that. But all of them said that if they didn't do that, they not only didn't know what was going to be involved in their composition, they had no shot of getting the proportions right. And that's a huge thing when you're writing stories, because no matter what story you tell, it's going to go from A to B to C to D. Even if you're doing it non-linearly, you're going to be at one thing, and the narrator is going to shift to another thing, and then it's going to be another thing. Even if you're writing a journalistic piece, it's going to be a bunch of suppositions and facts and figures that build on themselves, and it's going to go from one thing to the next and the next, right? And what that progression, if you know what that is in advance, even if it's just the slightest little bit, right? You have a enormous advantage in terms of when you sit down and write, like enormous. And that has never played out more clearly than looking at people that are doing watercolor or oil painting. You ask them, okay, just go ahead and just let it rip, right? Okay, you want to do, a sunset thing or whatever. Unless you're working off a picture, you don't have. If you're working off a picture, you don't have to do that. But if you don't have a picture, right? Because the picture is going to give the visual artist the outline of what they want to do. But if you don't have that, and you're just coming right out of the top of your head, you need those stick figures on there to be able to tell you this is the composition I'm going to go after. So when I go into a story now, I'll spend 10 minutes and go, okay, I'm going to start on this, and I'm going to go to here, and I'm going to go to here, and I'm going to go to here, and I'm going to end with this. That might be all I have, right? But that's enough for me to go into the thing knowing, what do I know so far? One, I know the story. I know what I'm good at. Two, I know of all the things of all the stories I could tell that I could cram, or I could filter through a narrative, the narrative voice that I feel most comfortable doing. There's 1,000 of them I could do, but I picked these because it's emotionally charged, right? Okay, great. Now I'm going to pick this story. Now, what is this story? If I can get that down to 3 sentences, I have some idea thematically what I'm doing. Okay. Once I know thematically what I'm doing, specifically what am I doing? Not in any kind of really fine grained way. I'm talking about as general as an artist, an oil painter putting 3 stick figures on a canvas this size and knowing that's my basic composition. I haven't detailed anything. It can go any number of different ways, but at least I know the river's there, the trees there, the house is there. When I get into it, I might want to change that composition around, but at least as that's going along, I know where I am and I'm conscious of where I'm going. I might change it, but at least I have some markings for that. That's all we're doing, right? But when you have those in place, we have found incontrovertibly, no exception, that it gives us a huge advantage. Okay, are we making? And this is all input. None of this has to do with how you write it. None of it has to do with thematically or the tone, the voicing, or the characterization. This is all basic forensic stuff you can do before you start. That doesn't take very long, but tends to make, in almost every case, a huge difference on the chance of us doing something that we can do successfully and being able to do it efficiently. Okay. So, Mike, why don't you talk a little bit about this figure thing, because you worked with me over a considerable period of time on that. And just briefly, we don't have too much time, just briefly discuss your experiences with how tricky this stuff is and where you are at with it now. I want to hear other students to hear just, another person that's dealt with this, because I've been dealing with 30 years, and your take on it's going to be a little bit different. So if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem, John. And it was, we've only been working together for a few months with you coaching me on my writing, and my background is completely different genre of business journalism. So I had to sort of relearn how to write narrative fiction. But your process of the 4 steps at first was confusing to me, and I really needed to do it to understand it. But also when you showed me how other artists and other artistic fields or genres, how they, from painting to sculpture, whatever, basically they all use sketches, and it allows them to show and understand where the figures of their painting or their art, or in this case their story, the proportion of the figures, the sequence of the figures, and where they belong, in the story, if you will. Once I grasped that, it allowed me to sort of come up with a more structured approach to writing narrative fiction, where I could up front, before I just started to drill down into the actual writing, I could up front see the bones and the architecture of the story and decide if anything was, 1, out of proportion, and 2, if it all made sense. Because as you pointed out to me, and I learned the hard way, what's the point of diving in and writing thousands of words only to realize you just wrote yourself into a dead end? There's like the story's not going anywhere. You don't know how to get out of the hole you dug yourself into. So by using the process that you're suggesting, especially around the outlining and the sketches, if you will, of the figures, it's been hugely helpful for me in terms of producing better stories.
Yeah, and thanks, Mike. The thing to understand is, to reiterate, none of this stuff is telling anybody how to write. Okay? This is all organizational stuff that puts you in a position to write. Okay? And in teaching these symposiums for over nothing, like going on a decade now, we found that where people mainly went wrong in their stories was they started off with the wrong stuff and the wrong approach, and they never even got to the place where they could even apply their talent. Right? I mean, it's crazy that once we're able to get people to do some semblance, everybody does this differently, but if they could just organize themselves like this, their stories almost across the board became completely more coherent and better, right? Because they got into the thing with a process that amplified their chances of success on it. And this is without any kind of coaching on how to write. This is all just setting yourself, like, how do you tee the ball up before you hit it? Right? Anyway, there are a couple other thoughts I want to leave you with before we get to phase 3. And one of the things is, you don't need that many figures. When I say figures, you could look at that as scenes, right? Okay, yeah, there's a scene on it. If you're doing a climbing thing, there's a scene hiking to the base. There's a scene on the first day. There's a scene topping out. There's a scene on the descent. There's a scene back in the bar. All of those are the basic big beats that you're going to present in a linear order. There might be flashbacks, there might be flash forwards. Nevertheless, you're going to have some big, giant chunks of plot which follow one after the other, right? That's the figures that we're talking about. And those are the sketches that the oil painter and the water painter put on the canvas so they know what the hell they're drawing. Okay? Doesn't have to be and shouldn't be anything in too great a detail, because it's going to change when you get into it. But having some orientation is the same as a builder is having some plan, some blueprint, and it helps immensely. So that much said, know that you don't need many figures to achieve the effect of a story. What you need are the right ones in the right place at the right time. And that's one of the things that kills most stories, is people try to do too much. It doesn't take many. If you have the right ones in the right place at the right time, it's like oil painting, or watercolor. You go up close, you can't even see. You're looking at the thing, you can't see anything. You move back and you realize, oh, your brain does all the work. It just fills it in. That's a rainy day in a cafe. And it's accomplished with just a few little strokes. It's amazing how, it's like narrative writing is the same way. You don't have to kill people with detail. If you just use the right ones in the right place, the narrative will happen on its own. Okay? It's real subtle. And I know for myself, I never trusted the reader. I never trusted myself when I first started. I would try to bombard people with information and scenes and all the rest of it. When now I've scaled back things to where you're just barely going. Sort of here, you go into it deep, you move over here, you move over here. Sort of a much lighter, easier touch. I don't put nearly as much stuff in that I used to. And the language is much simpler than when I started. But the effect is much better, I hope. Anyway, some helpful thoughts on the skeletal writing, or writing a skeletal outline. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Outlines help limit overwriting, adding stuff we don't need, and excursions into barren ground. The skeletal outline keeps us focused on the main thing. A narrator, Ishmael, a ship on a mission, Captain Ahab chasing Moby Dick. It's really that basic, all right? Second thing, we cannot overstate the uselessness of almost everything. Again, outlines narrow our focus to what is vitally needed to tell the story and nothing else. You don't need to put anything else in but what's vital, and the outline will show you that. Basically, what you're doing with an outline is you're trying to adjust the signal to noise ratio. And what that is you just dialed out all the noise, all the stuff you don't need, and you're just going with the pure signal. That's the first step in getting to the signal is being able to write that Michener statement, 2-3 lines. This is what I'm doing. Then you go to a skeletal outline of the main figures and you get those down. And all of those are the signal in it, like what the narrative is going to be. It's the signal in as pure form as you can get. And when you get that nailed, you are ready. Are we getting clear on this? Is this right? You know, it's amazing. One of the amazing things about this is really it's not debatable, right? The idea that you'll be in better shape if you just wing it, I've never seen that to be the case in teaching or in my own writing. And this stuff sounds sort of involved. Once you get used to this, working with these things in whatever way you can, this process that I'm telling you about will comprise about 2 to 3% of your total time writing. It's over in a minute, right? You just get it out of the way. All the time, all the grind is in the fourth step, which is moving towards the final draft, right? But if you overlook these first couple little steps, the last part will just wear you out because you're instinctively trying to do something that requires very conscious construction. And that's something we found out really the hard way. So now I'm going to get to the third part, which is generating source material. Okay. Generating source material. This one is hard, right? And what's involved in this is, let me go back to something Jeff Jackson said, and it stuck with me as being particularly true, and that is the mind that we use to do first drafts is not at all the mind we use in the revision or fourth stage. The first draft stage is you're just trying to generate source material, which you will later work up and formulate into a finished or polished draft, right? So we're running out of time here, so let me go into this. Understand this is a very tricky thing. I'm going to have Mike talk about this a little late because he really struggled with this, but eventually got it. And that is the way that this, I got my head around what was going on with this third step. One is I understood what Jeff was saying when saying, because look, what people want to do, most people instinctively go, I just want to get down to writing this thing, right? And what they'll try to do is they'll try to go right into formulating a final draft right from the first time they start, which is something if you're a working journalist, you pretty much have to do that. But if you're writing long form narrative stories or poetry or whatever, you can have a little bit more time, and that gives you a chance to do this third step. Now, Jeff had said, look, it's a different mind to this sort of come what may freestyle generation of the original source material, then I'm going to sit down as a polished writer and try to formulate this stuff into a final draft that I can hand in, right? Two completely different things. But the tendency is to want to start with the fourth step and skip the third. Don't do that, okay? You're shortchanging yourself in ways you can never imagine, right? And I first got a hold of this idea because I knew this was true, because I would be struggling with trying to do a finished draft of something, and the thing would end up being so tight and so overwrought and so overworked. I'd throw my hands up and go, what the hell did I want to say? It doesn't even sound human anymore. And then I'd look at it and something spontaneously would bust out of me. I go, that's exactly it. That's what I wanted to say. It's a spontaneous expression of engaging the figures. Okay. And I really got a handle on this when I started looking at the comments on YouTube videos on music, especially ethereal or minimalist music. Like there was this one thing, a real famous minimalist long form concert that was called Water Music 2, right? And it's got 12 million hits or something. And you read the comments in there, and you could tell people trying to write rarefied stuff and esoteric stuff and sounded brilliant. And then all of a sudden you'd read something from a woman that had just spontaneously written something out and it says, listening to this music is like being inside a tear, right? And you're like, holy shit, that's what you want in your final draft, right? That's the gold. And that comes from somebody listening to the music and spontaneously responding to it. Okay. I know this sounds like a foreign kind of thing, but what happens is, let me explain it this way. If you look at movies, are particularly good at being able to create a narrative trance. That is, once the movie starts, if it's good and it hooked you, you forget you're looking at a movie. You're in a trance, in suspended, whatever, and you're a fly on the wall. You're in the scene. You're watching the thing. You're part of it, right? Same thing happens in a narrative. It's magic. There are black marks on a page. Okay, how is it that you're living this experience by looking at that? Because your brain's doing all of it, right? In your imagination, you're in a trance of a kind, right? What you're doing when you're writing this stuff in the third step is that, and this is why you want the material to be loaded with emotional, intellectual, transcendental, visceral dynamite, is because when you go into your own trance and you identify and drop into the figures, spontaneous stuff will just burst out of you if you let it, right? And you just spontaneously just let it rip. And you end up with all of this stuff, right? And I'm not talking about free association or free drawing. You're actually thinking about it. Okay, what would happen? What would I like to happen here? Okay, I've got this, and this. It's not finished writing. It might be scraps. It might be great stuff. It might be fragments. Who knows? But just let it rip. Anything that wants to come out when you're associated with that figure, that's the third step, right? Mike, talk a little bit about this because you've struggled with this and you know exactly what the difficulties are.
Yeah. Can you hear me, John?
Yeah.
Yeah. This was the toughest part for me, and it took you had to beat me over the head with a Bible or whatever for weeks before I finally had the breakthrough moment. And it happened really one night in the middle of the night. It was like 4 a.m. I just stopped really trying to control what I was writing and just started to let my sort of like inner self write for me and just not worry about the sentence construction, the punctuation, anything. Just like you said, just let it rip. And I was focused on a storyline that had a lot of emotion, like you suggested. And instead of trying to control what words I put on the page, I just tried to like relive that moment, that very emotional moment in the scene that I was writing about. And I just, next thing you know, I had like a dozen pages of very, I think very energetic, colorful scene going down. And the sun came up. It was dawn. And like 2 hours had just blown by. But what I ended up with was a great amount of raw material then to come back and work on. So yeah. I didn't believe it at first until I actually experienced this trance moment. And by the way, I was listening to Miles Davis, some jazz in the background. I think that helped.
Yeah. The thing is, everybody's a genius in this respect if you can just let yourself be it, right? Everybody is. And that third step, when you let it rip like that, that gives you the raw material that when you go to the fourth step, which is the revision editing step, you have all this stuff to work with. If you try to evoke the power and the emotional charge and the insight and all the rest of the stuff in a very formal register, that actually it works against it, right? because you're just too far removed from the figure.
Mm-hmm.
If you stay close to the thing and generate all of this stuff, you might only use 5 or 10% of it, but man, it really gives you something to work with. And I would encourage everybody to explore. And if you get that handout, it goes into this in great detail about how to get into doing this thing. All right, and we're sort of running out of time, but let me the idea is you're not trying to, basically the idea is you're not trying to, if you pick something, a story that has some charge to it, and when you think into the, and you've broken the story down to composite parts, when you think into each one of those parts, you're going to have something to say about it, like a lot to say about it. If you let yourself say it in an unedited way, meaning this is my first shot at it, this is my first draft. If you let yourself go into that and just write, okay, a lot of stuff, you might be surprised by what comes out of you. You'll end up with something when you move to the fourth stage where really all the artistry and compositional skill is involved. You're looking at this stuff, you reformulate it all. But there's going to be some gems in there that you're probably going to that probably survive as is. Are we making any sense at all here, Bruce? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I did. My thought on that is how to, of course, we can do all this with word processing. You can, write a whole bunch of things and then reorganize it, reposition it, get it in good form, work on your grammar, work on your spell check. How did people do it before word processing when you had a handwrite it or a manual typewriter? How could you possibly do this?
You ended up doing a lot of drafts is what you did.
Yeah. Over and over and over, typing things out. Really time consuming.
Yeah, well, it's going to be time consuming anyway, right? Okay, so step 4 is the only part that I call output, which is what we're going to output is we've input all of this stuff. Now it's time to output something. And in terms of output, most of the writing tutorials and writing instruction that you're going to get deal with step 4. I haven't dealt with it at all, right? However, there are a couple things I have found that if you do nothing else, there's so many different resources you can look on step 4. It doesn't, I'm not going to be able to bring anything particularly new to step 4 to anybody. And that's a personal study, and it's going to take you the rest of your life. You never get through it. You never learn enough. However, there are 2 things I have found that are very, very helpful and that are in the handout. One is get a hold of William Zinster's On Writing Well. That's the new sort of, it used to be Elements of Style. Now it's On Writing Well. That's pretty much the end of the road on stuff. You can neglect everything in there, but do not neglect chapter 3, and that's on clutter. And that is how you get all the stuff you generated in 3 and you started formulating things down. How do you edit that down to gold? How do you get rid of all the superfluous words, all the rest of it, right? That tells you that chapter 3 in On Writing Well is, I must have read that thing 100 times, and it revolutionized my career because I knew how to after a while, I just knew how to get rid of, you're supposed to write a story within 1 word of its life, right? And that chapter made it clear to me how to do that. And it's 13 pages long. If you internalize all the ideas in that, you are off to the races. The second thing is, just in the last year, 6 months, the guy that started the writing program at Harvard, Lawrence Weinstein, had a surprising bestseller called Grammar for a Full Life. The paperback, $18, $16, whatever. Get a hold of that and internalize all. He's gone into grammar in ways that and it's very basic and simple. His explanations are simple and will make, plenty of sense. If you can get a hold of what he's talking about in there, that it will help your writing in immense ways. And those are the two things that I would say. Zensner, chapter 3 on clutter, and Weinstein's bestseller, Grammar for a Full Life. If you make those your own, the material in both of those will help you immensely. If you follow the first 3 steps that we've gone over today, there's a handout or an attachment that goes into much more greater detail than we've been able to do here. I was hoping we have more time to go into some more exercises on this thing so people can start getting a feel for this, but there's simply not enough time to do it. But in any event, if you get jiggy with these first 3 steps and actually try them out for size, I like your chances of doing really good work. So we'll take a little while longer to answer any other questions, but I wanted to try to keep this thing at 90 minutes because I promised Leah she has to work at that library all day long, and I don't want to keep her up too late. So, look, this is to open it up for discussion. If anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to try to take a whack at them.
Hey, John, a quick question about from a proportion standpoint. How much time should you spend on that phase 3, sort of like producing that big raw amount of material to work with, in hopefully in a trance-like, writing mode? Like proportionally, how much time would you spend?
It really depends on, everybody does that step a little differently, and it depends on sometimes if it's really charged stuff, you can come up with an enormous amount of stuff, right off the bat, right? And once you say, okay, I got enough to work with to go to final draft, who knows? I think it varies story to story.
Mm-hmm.
What everybody generally does is they go to a chapter or step 4, and they try to generate material in step 4. And it's very inefficient to do that because you're already tightened up, right? You're in formal register. You're trying to finish, write a finished kind of draft of something before you even have any idea what the terrain is on the thing. And it's real inefficient. It's quite, what you're going to end up doing is just revising that ad nauseum, right? It's easier just to take it raw and then to take the raw material and trying to do a judicious edit on that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How long that second or that third phase is going to take, man, I don't know. I can't say. Sometimes things come together. What happens is basically you're moving up and down in this thing all the time. Like I often move 3 to 4 to 4, and then I have to go back to 3. Like I get the thing, I get to a place and I go, okay, I know exactly what I need here, but I'm in finish mode and I need to get down and dirty with this stuff. Okay, what do I need here? Then I go back into the 3 mindset and I'll come up with a bunch of stuff that'll slot in there. Then I'll have to work on that to formulate it and make it fit what, from where it came from and where it's going. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're sort of toggling between those two, right?
Yeah. The real shock for me, John, and I just wanted to share it with the rest of the folks here before we sign off, was how much material I was able to easily generate in phase 3, but I had to give up at least half of that in phase 4.
Oh,
or when and that was painful because it's like I love that stuff. It was like pride of ownership.
Well, it's you coming right out onto the page. And we don't give that up easy, and it's hard to get to that material, right? It's easy to assume an erudite or polished voice. You can say anything, doesn't mean anything, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was the hard part for me, is like giving it up then, right? But it is the process. Whatever. You can't use 20,000 words in a short story, right?
No. Okay. Anybody else?
So when you did your thinking in stage 3 and you come up with all these ideas, are you ever able to use some of the ideas that you're not able to use in your first project for other projects?
Exactly. Great point. In fact, what a lot of stuff will come up that I'll compartmentalize and put off to the side because it's such great stuff that I'm going to be able to use that eventually somewhere. So I keep it. Yeah, the thing is, if you're going to source yourself, you don't know exactly what's going to come up, and you don't know whether it's going to be appropriate for what you're doing. But almost all of it will be valuable in some way at some time.
Keep it.
Yeah, keep it. What another last thought, and when you get in page 4, when you're doing your final, this is a really important piece. I forgot to mention this, and that is, how often have we found ourselves slaving over something, a passage, an idea, whatever, and for whatever reason we can't make the damn thing work, right? And I'm stubborn, so I dig my heels in. I'm going to keep trying and keep trying. You know what the solution? 99 times out of 100, you know what the solution is for that? Dump it. Dump it completely. Because it would have happened already if it was natural to the story. You're trying to force something that doesn't fit. Like an editor taught me that early on, and I was like, heck with that, man. That's my baby here. I started assuming I'm just going to dump it. Man, I was amazed with how many times that worked. Just dump it. If it's not happening, get rid of it. Quick fix. It's unbelievable. Otherwise, you just get stuck on something and half a day is gone. I'm like, damn. And I'm stubborn enough to do that. They're hard-headed or stupid enough or whatever. Anyway, Eileen, any thoughts?
It's been great. I think I speak for a lot here.
What's that?
I'm biased, but I said it's been great.
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty fast. There's a lot coming at people, but we have a tutorial. And after, maybe everything we talked about doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Go back and look at that. That's pretty well worked out, and I think it's fairly clear. Okay. Anyway, thanks for everybody for showing up. I hope you learned something, and with any luck, you've learned a few things that'll make you more efficient and it will set you in a greater position for success. And that's what we want. Best of luck to everybody. I hope to read all of your stuff soon.
Yeah. Thanks, John. And this was recorded, and we'll put it on our Mountain Story website if you want to refer back to anything. And if you didn't get, and I dropped it in the chat a couple times, his wonderful outline workshop with all these digressions and examples of these steps to narrative writing. You can email me. I'll drop my email in the chat before everybody signs off, and I can email it to you there. And we'll try to put it on the website too and convert it into a shareable format. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great.